Hi, Mia. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Hanging in. We'll give it just a minute or two for everyone to join and get settled, and then we will um, get the meeting going. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, hey, friends.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioner. How are you?
Good afternoon. How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Just want to double check, is your whole team coming today with the tech team?
I believe so. We have Fred North, we
Yep.
have Mike Carone, we have Vin. Let me just make sure. We had a couple of our IT folks joining as well. Let me scan the room. I don't see them on yet. Do you know Fred? I believe he was coming. Bear with me.
I had Ayanku,
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Ming, Manny,
Yanku,
and Steve.
Nikolai. Yeah,
Yeah, I think they were all invited, but I don't know specifically. Sorry.
got it. It's okay. Yeah, I think they're coming.
Would
But
you?
we don't have to hold up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that then. Well, we'll get going just to be respectful of everyone's time. Senator Marr is not able to be here at the meeting today. She is traveling, but we'll be catching up afterwards. I didn't know if Senator Perillo would like to say anything before we get going as ranking member of the committee.
No, let's get moving.
Awesome. All right. So thanks to everyone for being here today and for sharing the information of what they thought were priorities after our first meeting. Mia compiled everything that was shared via the Google Doc that was sent out and returned, and it's quite a list. We wanted to be comprehensive to start and then start looking at I think a couple of points when we are discussing them and to see what can be included, what has to be included as a priorities and what might be better served as information found elsewhere. Um, So the thought that I had today is if we are able to go through some of the points that were shared and discuss some of the specifics of what we would want that to actually represent. So if, I'm looking at, point 3 under the workforce, under the first agenda, each one. And then if people had any thoughts that they wanted to share, we can start doing that. Um, and and if this is something that is already being included in the beta program that DCF the agency is putting together already, then that would be great just for us to be able to notate that that's already been addressed. And Commissioner, did you want to, before we get started, just to make any comments about moving forward?
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I too wanted to thank the group for submitting, some areas or items, issues, topics, they thought might be useful to have on the dashboard, and or I think ultimately maybe we'll determine dashboard or otherwise available on the website that might not be a real-time um, dashboard type of a data point. But I thought the list, certainly had a lot of good information on here. And certainly I think we could go through, as you said, Representative Welander, and things that we already collect that would be available on the website. And then we can also, if there's time, we can actually share sort of it's more of a template with mock data on it that shows some of the areas that we have already been working on to make sure, really with the focus on as much outcome data as possible. So, yeah, I think that sounds great. And just thank you to the group for the time and the attention to this topic.
That would be great. And actually, what you did touch upon something that I think would be a good point for us to try to clarify moving forward, which is what we are intending or hoping for when we say real time, being updated in real time, and what that will actually be able to be done so that our expectations are in line with what can actually be realistically accomplished based off of what is needed in order to get that data to a public facing standing.
Right, perfect. And I do think that some of the categories, even in the language of the legislation, is information that I think might end up being more like static in the sense of it would be updated on a regular basis. But when I think about programs and services that are offered, links to things that are available to the community, to others who would be engaging with our agency, or just general information about our programs that are accessible to anybody, and things like training curriculums and things like that are maybe not in this. When I think of data dashboard, I think of the actual outcome data. And we'll show a mock-up so you guys can see what I'm thinking of. But there might be another way of capturing some of the other things that might not be real time, but we would have a cadence for updating them on our website, if that makes sense. Because they're kind of like categories are a little bit different, but equally important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that when we are having these conversations that there isn't the understanding or expectation that this would be data that's updated every day,
Right.
every
Right.
week, even every month. It might be possible, but that we should set that expectation of how long we would like to have in between updates, and to understand as a whole, both as a group and publicly, like what does it entail and what is needed to make that update happen. Representative Foster.
Thanks, Rep. Welander. I have a question. Is it possible for there to be a screen share of the doc we're referring to while we talk about it? And I just like to put a pin in this because I've noticed since I've been a legislator and a scientist, I've struggled with the way we talk about outcomes on a programmatic level versus the way we would talk about outcomes if we were like doing a formal evaluation of a program. And one of the things that I think it's probably helpful to talk about in the dashboard in the metrics that are updated regularly is like what possible intervention could the legislature or DCF or the executive branch, make in the access to that data. And so like, for example, caseloads and the number of visits or duration to closure might not be enough if we also need to be considering like average visit and severity of original call or number of calls per household. Like there might be some dependence in the data as it goes through that I wouldn't know. That's outside of sort of my scope of expertise. But I think about this as like what would be actionable to me. Like I kind of want to be able to see the dashboard and say like it's very clear to me that the legislature needs to prioritize X, Y, or Z. And so I want like a lot of times when I see data that's reported out through the agencies, it's like a case count number, but the number isn't like unique by participant, or the number, like it doesn't tell you who cross references between programs. And it's not really like possible sort of to tease out the like causal inferences. If we made this change, we could anticipate this improvement. And so I just want to say like that's sort of my hope in the data that we talk about, that this dashboard is something that any legislator could say like, hey, I heard this problem in my district. I pulled up the dashboard and I'm like, oh, whoa, I understand where the problem is. How can I help as a legislator? What does DCF need from me to make improvements or, change to move forward? That's sort of what I'm hoping for. But I'm like, my big concern is like the actionability of this data. And so I would love like if we could sort of screen share what we're talking about in reference and I could try and wrap my head around that. And I apologize, I missed the first meeting. So I'm coming in blind, but I apologize and I'm looking forward to digging in. Thank you, everybody.
No, thank you. Those are all really great points. Rep Belton?
Hello, everyone. I was hoping that we could first look at the mock-up that the commissioner was talking about, and using that as like a starting point. Maybe we can, look at that first and then go through this list and see, if there are things that we think need to be changed or things that we can keep, because, she mentioned that there are some things that they are doing. So I think that would be a great starting point.
I'm fine with that. If your team is,
Yeah, I think that
Ready
would
to
be
go?
great. That would be great. So I'll toss it to Fred, and we'll put some, he'll do the proper framing of it. We tried to be as inclusive and responsive to some of the comments, not only at the last meeting, but just in general when we've been talking about different ways, also internally looking at other states and the dashboards that they have created. And I think Wisconsin was certainly one of them. And are you able to share your screen, Fred?
I just asked to be allowed.
Okay,
Let's
perfect.
see.
That's great.
There we go.
So these are examples, not real actual data, but you'll see the sort of what the visual would look like once the group kind of determines what and by the use of the word outcomes, I appreciate that the comment earlier around that. When we some of the outcomes that all child welfare systems are measured against are federal outcome measures that apply nationally. So some of them are things like related to length of time in care, for example. So once children enter care, how quickly do we get them to permanency? That's one of the measures, and always the goal as far as intervention goes is what are the things and strategies we can do to try to reduce that time in care. That's just by way of example. So, but I think the use of the word outcome is a good point to sort of raise as we're talking about what we mean when we say that. So Fred and his team kind of did it's very skeletal at this point, but really just wanted to provide a little bit of a framework. So I'll toss it to you, Fred, and you can correct me if I framed anything incorrectly.
No, I think that was just fine, Commissioner. Thank you. So yeah, first real quick, I noticed in the agenda that it asked us to report it on our beta dashboard. And just to clarify language, we haven't gotten to the point of a beta dashboard yet. That would imply that we actually have this framework kind of built out and we're starting to test it. We're not to that stage yet. This is design. So design and specification. So we're trying to gather information from this group about exactly what do we need to build out and the best way to do it. So this mock-up, first of all, is any data you see here is either completely fictitious or not Connecticut's data. And it's just for illustrating kind of what we're talking about. And at this level, we're really just talking about how would we organize this work across a set of pages. And this is just one way out of many possible ways that we could organize this dashboard set of pages or a dashboard site. And I've numbered them here. And we're definitely hoping for feedback on what you all think of this particular way of organizing things. Should we do it differently? There's, as I pointed out in our last meeting, there's a lot of choices. So we completely acknowledge there's a lot of ways to do this, and this is just one possible way that seemed to make some sense based on our own thoughts and what we've seen across many other states' child welfare related dashboards. So the first level is just a very high level that introduces the user to the department and provides some contextual data. So at this level, it's not outcome data, to the representative's point. Thank you, as well for clarifying language. At this point, this is context. This is what does the department do and how much do they do it? I am a relatively big fan of the old results-based accountability framework, so I will likely lapse into using some of that language, that how much, how well, and how is anyone better off kind of language. So this is kind of the how much type of things. And there could be many things on this page, more than what I'm showing here. This is, again, just a sample to kind of illustrate it. We did take under advisement the note from the last meeting and agree, really, that having visuals right on the first page does kind of grab the viewer and help pull them into the information. We've included a lot of different types of charts here, again, just for illustration. We probably would only use one or two types of charts, types of visuals, but show many different, data points using those chart types. Having lots and lots of chart types on a page can be impressive, but it can also be really confusing. So I would never propose that we actually have a view that looks exactly like this. So that's the high level. We'd also have definitions for each of the mandate areas for the department. I've just put placeholders here for the moment. We could also have links out to other websites, other things that already exist. Couple examples. I know that the Children's Behavioral Health work group is also putting together a dashboard. Sorry, hold on one sec. Sleepy dog. And we have a lot of other information posted online on our own website. To Commissioner, to your point, we have all kinds of things already organized there, and other websites that other folks have done. I think particularly of Children's Health and Development Institute, CHDI, as it relates to behavioral health programs, particularly Emergency Mobile Psych is a great example, or the urgent crisis centers. Okay, so that's the high level. And right, so we could click on that and it could take you to more of a reports and information page that has that kind of static information, Commissioner, that you were just talking about, things that don't change very much, but are more detailed about that particular mandate area of the department. We also have already this, the Data Connect site. which organizes data somewhat. We've been working on making that even a little bit better organized and cleaning up a lot of the older things that have been left on there for a while, and making sure we're updating some things there as well. But that site then gives you links to related pages, like our federal reports page, which is where you can find our CFSP, our Child and Family Services Plan, and related documents, and our annual reports under that plan that we provide to the Children's Bureau every year. So that's kind of the second level. And then the third level would be, if I can get PowerPoint to cooperate, there we go. Oh, before I get to the third level, these are just a listing of some other types of reports that we know have been asked for. And again, to that point of real time versus as they become available. Most of these reviews are reported out on biannual basis or even annual. The actual like data points that we're pulling out of systems and visualizing, that could be more frequent. Representative Wellender, to your point, either monthly, quarterly are certainly feasible for that type of data. This is more reports and information rather than data points. Okay, and then we get to the next level, which, so now we're still inside of a particular mandate area, and this is high level. This could be a panel of small boxes like this that show a mix, and I would organize it on the page, mix of performance indicators, how well are we serving people, and the longer term outcomes like achieving timely permanency in 12 months, like trying to avoid repeat maltreatment, things like that. This idea comes from Florida's Child Welfare Dashboard. They have a page like this that has about 16, maybe 20 different metrics at a high level listed out there. Again, so also this would be, and we would make it clear, this would be for the most recent time period probably that's completed, most recent completed year, state fiscal year, calendar year. Could theoretically do both of those depending on the time of year and how often we update it, right? And then from here, you can then click on any one of these and drill into that to the fourth level, which is a measure specific or metric specific page. This particular example comes from Minnesota. We picked on this one because it uses the software called Tableau. Tableau is a piece of software that we're pretty familiar with at the department. We've been using it for the last couple of years for our Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System update called CT Kind, which was released last year. And we're still working through building out a lot of reports, dozens of reports using Tableau. So we have investment already in staff resources that understand and know and can use and develop in Tableau. So it would be a shorter time frame to use Tableau versus, for instance, Microsoft Power BI or other platforms to stand up something for this purpose. So on the metric specific page, then, you can see it breaks performance out for this metric for a particular time period by geography, gives you a trend over time. And again, we can decide how short or how long we want those trends to be. Could theoretically even leave it to a user to pick their own time period for trends. Breaks things out by race and ethnicity, by age. We can pick the point is we can pick the demographics and the things that we want to break things out by here. But standard kinds of things would certainly be geography over time, trends over time, by demographic, age, race, gender. And depending on the performance metric, there could be a lot of other factors that we may want to include. Although, again, for this purpose on a dashboard, we probably still want to keep that list relatively short and relatively high level. And that, I believe, is that for our initial kind of mock-up and design input.
Thank you for that, Fred. And I will just to add a couple things and then open it up to the group as you were presenting. I wanted folks also to know this is a framework, but as I'm thinking about like we would as a group, as far as recommendations go, what are those? And some of the things are in the list. I'm matching up against what this could include off of what was in the generated list of topics. And I think much of it, although it might not be on the mock-up, could be included in there, like for example, some of this around the permanence, like I'm thinking of data related to permanency, which was on the list, repeat maltreatment, rates of abuse and neglect over time, reentry rates. So for kids who do reunify and achieve permanency, how successful are we as a system of keeping them home? And we look at those trends over time, or do we have increased reentry rates into care? Although you might not have seen a box like that, once we kind of land on what are some of those key things that we'd want to trend over time, that would be included in those boxes that we could drill down. The other thing I think is important, I think I heard in the first meeting, and certainly a lot of our conversations, which would make sense, is the ability to be able to drill down as close to the local level as possible to sort of know geographically, and certainly for legislators in your districts or, whatever, being able to kind of cull out for all those reasons on those data points, but also, it helps inform us currently on where do we have service gaps. Are there, when we look at the service array across the state, there's some that are heavily saturated and some other areas of the state that don't have as much. So, but anyway, thank you for that, Fred. And again, open to this is like, we didn't want to be too prescriptive because we thought, let's just open it up to see if the framework made sense. And then, can go through all the data points that people raised.
That would be great. Thank you for that. Fred, did you want to follow up with something before we get open to?
Yeah, real quick. One more point on that measure specific page I wanted to make very often, and on that page that Minnesota has. If you click on any one of the geographies on the map, that then drills down all the other metrics on the page, the trends and the breakouts by race, ethnicity, et cetera, now are just for that geography. So the technology does help visualize smaller and smaller geographies like that, or information about the smaller geographies. Yep.
I know based off of the conversations we've had that being able to drill down as much as we can is really helpful. What Rep Foster was saying in the very beginning, I think is, our goal for this is to really make sure that we are able to ensure that the children and families of Connecticut are safe and supported, and that we are able as policymakers and everyone, advocates, are able to see the ways that we are succeeding and also the areas that we can provide more supports for those better outcomes and results. So the more information that we have that's local, I think the better. And just in terms of timeline, I know that we discussed in the first meeting that going back too far is a lot of data that would make a really laggy system. And that's not user-friendly, and that's what we want. We want everyone to be able to, I love the definitions on the first page, being able to say, okay, this is what it means, so that anyone who's not steeped in the profession can understand what it's representing. I think, and I would love to hear, thoughts from the group when we get to that point, it would be very beneficial to have it go back at least 10 years, just so we can have that snapshot of pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, because we know that there were so many variables that impacted reports that came because kids weren't in school, you know, things like that. So we want to make sure that we can have that balance when we're looking at things. That's my thought on that. Representative Foster.
Thank you so much. I am curious. I liked the Michigan dashboard and where you could toggle between the different options and get a different variable view. And I'm curious how many, or if any other state examples had staffing level, equipment or support or database level modifications you can make. The reason why I ask this question in particular is like one of the things that I hear from social workers that I know who work in the system is like, for example, one of the reasons why there's a challenge in reporting right now is the new system for documentation is very labor intensive and it takes more clicks to, you know, get from screen to screen compared to what it used to be. And so I'd be curious if a data system would have like policy level insights. So like the implementation of this new program hit on this day and the number of matriculated folks through the system slowed or increased based on this policy change. So I would basically like to be able to sort of break down the data like the census data does, or actually like Ed Insight does, the State Department of Education system, where you can sort of slice and dice the data to answer, not with causal certainty, but at least with strong correlations to understand if there's any patterns in the data. And I'm curious if that's something you all have considered.
I love that way of thinking about how there's so many variables that impact the work. And I think when we think about how as a system are we going to determine if the interventions that we're making, whether it be new statutes, new policy, new practice, new training, whatever it is actually impacting the data in the way we want to see. Is it trending in the right direction? I think we have to give, I think, some thought to how. I think it would be hard to capture that. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but as a data dashboard factor, only because there's so many variables that impact it. But I do think sort of what we do now organically, as we look at data points year over year, we know that there are certain things that change. Like, for example, the point you just raised around, we launched a new CT kind SACWA system last August, and that has impacted. So when we look at sort of maybe caseload size, the amount of time it takes to do the job, we will know as a system this was a factor, whether it was, like you said, causal or correlated, we'd have, but I think like we have new legislation that we can absolutely point to oftentimes that would be a contributor to why a number went up or down. So I think that might have to be just part of how we engage in the conversation about what is the data telling us. But I do think it's an important point because that's the reason why we all look at data, is to sort of, are we on the right track? Do we need to, did the things we did differently, or the things we funded, or the things that we passed as legislation, did that give rise to, the outcomes we were hoping? So I think that's maybe a broader conversation, but an important one. And I think that's like, we should be thinking about how will we use then the data once we determine what we want to track over time.
And it might be possible for you to just consider one or two policy variables a year for consideration. For example, like the way the census adds new variables is slow and painstaking, but you can slice and dice anything in that data set. And even though it won't be a data visualization, anyone can export a giant Excel file saying, here's the average food security score, race, ethnicity, other demographic characteristics. And then you can say, in these 3 states, they did this policy change. And in these 3 states, they did this policy change. And as a result, people were more or less hungry, as a result of this policy. And so you could choose, in collaboration with a committee like this, what causal inferences we want to evaluate.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we just have to be cautious as to, because I think that would be consistent with what we do now in some respects, but just to, there might, like to your point, we'd agree on what they are, but that it's not an exhaustive list. There might be many other things that also are impacting it. But there's some major themes, major initiatives, let's just say, or major demographic or population changes, like, for example, the number of calls to the care line. If we, we're going to say, if we saw a market increase in the number of calls to the care line and accepted calls to the care line, that'd be a variable that would impact how many open cases do we have at any given time, how many, what's the caseload size, things like that. So I do like that way of thinking about it, and that we can sort of talk about more as to where we would fit that in to the dashboard.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. It's good.
I think that's actually just another point that I was thinking about looking at the mock-up. I think one of the potential graphics and on the first page had an indicator about, I think it was indicating housing security as one of the little factors in the mock-up of the graph. And that is something that I think would be very helpful for all of us to be aware of. And then potentially, if we're able to incorporate it, the data points that lead to involvement in care system, where because we know that this doesn't happen in a silo, that a family just doesn't all of a sudden, hit a point out of nowhere where a child may need to enter the system. But that there are a lot of different points that can lead a family to needing different kinds of support. So do they have secure housing? Are the children attending school? Are there issues of food insecurity? Things that lead to the vulnerability that if you compound them. So that just to sort of think about the broader picture of the goal of safe, secure, healthy families and children within the state. Are there any other thoughts from the group that people would like to discuss or bring up now? Oh, Fred, go ahead.
And just on that point, I'm blanking which agency puts this together, but if you haven't seen the Connecticut Health Equity dashboards, it has a lot of that contextual kind of information around the vulnerability of the populations that DCF largely serves. I'll put a link to it in the chat in just a sec. That's a link that we could include from this dashboard to provide all that information.
Something was also mentioned to me, which I don't think is being updated anymore, but the report card, the children's report card, where that there was a lot of that information as well. So again, I don't want to have us all like reinventing the wheel, but sometimes that's what seems to be what happens, is that we have one committee or one agency get a data group, and then like education committee is pulling their information. And so how can we look at this as a whole, so that when we're putting together policy, we're not just piecemealing things, that we're actually trying to make real systemic change and improvements. Commissioner, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I love that too, because part of why we thought it would make a lot of sense in this framework, however we land on it, would be to make sure, to your exact point about not reinventing the wheel, and to leverage the things that are already being done, and having those hyperlinks to other pieces of data that might not necessarily be DCF data, but that it helps to provide context to what we might be seeing around the population that we serve. And that's why we sort of thought, like, in our mandate areas, having linkages, definitions to things that are already being produced, so that we're not having multiple groups talking about multiple pieces of data and information, but rather just linking to each other's to the extent that it's relevant. So we can sort of, I think there's a long list of those reports that are out there, and we can think about what are the best ones to to link. And then the additional thing we're trying to also be mindful, thinking about the audience for this, because we want it to be, I think all of us, the charges, we want it to be useful to the community at large. And so sometimes, and so maybe that's where we have the high cut visuals and information that then for people who are maybe wanting to drill down more into the actual data that populates could dig in more. So just something to think about, because I think the audience will be everybody, parents, all that. So we'll keep that at the forefront, I guess, as we're thinking about the design of it.
I think that's really will be helpful, because there are going to be people who are going to want to get really deep into the weeds on it, and others that are just looking for some high level information. And I didn't know if it had been discussed or considered, are we on the building tech side of this? There wasn't a decision yet about what should it be done by county or by DCF region. I wanted just to, again, get some thoughts from people on that. What would be the easiest way for, again, thinking about the different ways people are looking. As much as I would love to have something for the 114th, House district to be that specific, that's not going to work for anyone, basically me. But how can we, make sure this information makes sense? Just something to think about. Oh, Representative Kit.
Yes, what your comment there about getting down to district level, that is something that's, of course, helpful to us. And United Way has done it really well with their website for their Alice numbers. And I don't know if that's something we could take a look at and try to figure out how to incorporate that specific type of data, because that can help us identify communities of need and where we might have to focus more resources. Just a thought there. Going with it, let's not reinvent the wheel, but can we borrow parts of the wheel?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Okay. If there aren't any more immediate comments on the presentation that was shared, maybe we could jump back to the agenda with the list of points to consider and try to see how many we can get through. And if there's any, thoughts people wanted to share on each of those. So if Mia is able to do that when she gets a chance, that would be great. Thank you. And looking at the first number one under point A, the social worker vacancies and caseloads and staff turnover. That was when I was looking at that was what really made me think about how are we breaking this down? Because if we are trying to get an understanding of if there are certain regions within the state that are having either a high need from families, but also have a high need for caseworkers and social workers, what would be the best way to represent that? Is it by county? Is it by DCF region? Is it by municipality? That type of breakdown. Because that would be helpful so we can understand if the Milford agency office is having a higher staff turnover than Waterbury or what have you.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking about the overall topics or areas that might fall under workforce, and thinking about because of course we collect this data now around sort of vacancies and the caseloads and turnover and all of that. maybe yeah, and sort of the timeline from point of application to actual hiring and all of that. And I guess I'm trying to figure out whether or not something, as we were talking about, sort of data dashboard and some of those areas that we just talked about, and whether or not something related to workforce would be something that would be on the web. I don't know. I'm just trying to think it through, because we definitely collect it, and I'm trying to think about where's the right place to have that and to present it. Knowing on the audience side, maybe we think about a way to have that linked on our website or reported out on some cadence. I don't know. I'll to my group, anybody, Vin, you have your hand up. I'm just struggling with
Yeah,
dashboard
thanks.
versus, yeah.
Yeah, no, because I was thinking about the same thing. The second I hear about workforce, there's a couple things that pop into my mind. So we do provide annually to appropriations during the budget cycle, kind of our office by office workload breakdown. So that's something that we do get. I will say that's a lot of that data is housed at DAS, and we really count on our DAS partners to provide that for us. I also think that trying to have workforce data, whether it's live or close, it's so tricky because people are moving around all the time. So those numbers are going to be fluctuating nonstop, and it's hard to keep that up in real time. So I don't know if that annual submission that we do every year is enough to look at trends and what's happening across the state. We could certainly ask our DAS partners to provide that information at a different kind of cadence, but I think we'd have to check in with them to see what their capabilities are on specific numbers around workforce numbers and where those are located. And really the higher the retention piece is all that, it's all tracked through the central HR folks over there.
That's an interesting point. I think my guess is that it would be helpful to have the information more available than annually, just so if again, if there's something that is happening, what is it? Are we having higher turnover because this case severity has increased a lot? And how do we, does that lead to another one of those points of, well, we had, a major manufacturer close in that area, and that led to, how are we able to identify the, not chicken versus, the egg, but how everything relates to each other before it gets to a crisis point a year later? So is that something that your team, Commissioner, would be able to check in with the DAS side?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think for purposes of the, to your point, looking at maybe a more frequent, the sharing of some of that data, to have conversations, to your point, with legislators in particular around what are some of the things that might be impacting if the turnover. Are we needing more? Are there service gaps that are impacting more people, more workers leaving in a particular area of the geographical area of the state or not? Because this is an example of an area where I depending on the audience, like the general community probably isn't going to have as much interest in knowing about our turnover for purposes of informing or impacting resources or what we need. But legislative groups, of course, do. And we want to be able to share that in a way that's meaningful and timely, so that we can, figure out, is there something that we need to add or do differently in that way. So that's a hard part with some of this. I'm finding for myself is that depending on the audience, I think, but anyways, that's my long-winded response to say, yes, we can, I think, certainly provide the information in a more regular cadence and have some conversations around that. I think what we would want to think about is whether that makes sense to have on a high-cut data dashboard, public-facing dashboard, or do we want to think about, it certainly could be. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but but I think we can definitely provide it And we look at it all the time, you know, on an ongoing basis for all the reasons. So I think when I look at the rest of the list under workforce, it's like, I think that's what I'm gleaning from it is it's in part related to how does the caseload like impact cases open and close and caseload size, which I think was on here too, right? The caseload, well, it had supervisor to workforce ratios. Did I see this on here? Maybe I guess it's caseloads, the caseload weighting, because that's one of the things, as I know, certainly we have shared and others have also recognized that our caseloads because of the turnover are higher. And so ways that we can impact that is really, that's why that piece is relevant to the actual, in part related to the actual work, because we want caseloads to stay at a manageable level to accomplish all these outcomes.
And I think I would argue that caseload and staff ratios would be very helpful to people outside of the legislature and policy making side. I'm just thinking if someone is thinking about becoming a foster parent, if they're able to know that there are going to be the supports there in their region, that maybe that would clear up some of their hesitancy. So this is, I would imagine and argue that the information that we're hoping to get out there can't just be skewed through the lens of, looking at our end.
Right.
Which I know
Yeah.
is not the goal. And the other question
Yeah.
I had, and then I'll jump to Rep. Foster, is wouldn't all of this information about the employment side be tracked already by CT Core, the employment portal? Because they're state employees and whether or not those positions have changed?
Some of the information would pull from there, but not all of it. But I can say when looking at the list, we do have access to that information.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're pulling it all from when we look at our caseload reports and our staffing vacancies and time from vacancy to refill, all of that pulls from, I think, a number of different sources, but we definitely have it and look at it regularly. So we can certainly figure out the best place to have that housed and shared.
Okay. Representative Foster?
I found myself thinking of OPM, like Scott Gall and Rachel Leventhal Weiner, when I do the conference at the Capitol every year, where there's been some people who've advocated, who've used DCF data they've gotten from OPM before, who presented at that conference, that they sort of talk about the types of different data that could be sunk up across, and maybe they'd be worthwhile to be part of one of these working groups in the future. I know they get their data from you all, but I think because they're sort of work is more data analytics and data sharing and data transparency focused, that they might have like a better sense for fast answers on the fly of like what types of data sets can be merged across agencies to give us productive sort of answers to these questions. So like, can you get from core CT when someone's been moved from one region to another? Would having that on the dashboard tell us that in, region 1, 2, 3, staff turns over faster than any other region, and they get promoted into other regions, and we always have the newest, greenest people in this region, and that results in worse outcomes in that area. And can that information be public so that we can advocate for difficult region salary differentials that the legislature backs through the budgeting process. So just thinking specifically about the kinds of things that we hear pretty regularly, like when we've had meetings, on these topics after, things have happened in our districts, one of the things we hear from, the social work group is like, in certain high risk areas, you see a lot of staff turnover, but you see a lot more stability in the places where people don't burn out. And that probably contributes to a care quality differential that feels like it could be modifiable. Maybe not, but it could be. And if it is, what can we do to help?
Well said. Thank you, Rep. Foster. Okay. Senator Kushner, I saw you unmuted. I wasn't sure if you wanted to say anything. Okay. Um, okay. Just to continue on, jumping on to point 2, data around caseloads, client encounters by category, in-person, Zoom, mail. I'm assuming that when this was asked to be a priority, or to be discussed, that we are looking at whether or not not only just the number of cases that each social worker is having to manage, but also are they following the protocol of meeting in person and on the regular patterns, and schedules, and what are are we following up based on the policies that are and the practices that are already in place, making sure that we have that information. And I think what would also be helpful to have is included in the dashboard is all information about whether or not a case is investigated versus referred to FAR.
Yeah, I think as we're going through these, I think maybe what might be helpful, and Fred, you can help me with it, is or any of the other folks on the DCF team that are here, of the things that we are already collecting. And so that certainly would be something that we would have the capacity to do, and then we can determine what makes the most sense to have it up there. But around the encounters by category, so one of the things that gets tracked, one of the slides had the things that we do collect, that we do as part of our, and Freddie, you can correct me, but the in-home, for example, in-home reviews that are looking at the required face-to-face contacts, contacts and visitation with the children, household members. There's certain core things that are part of, and maybe at some point with this group, we could do a presentation that kind of shows the different types of things that are part of the reviews we already do, but that is one of them. Certain key contacts that are required, and that they be face-to-face. So that's certainly one that is tracked now.
So if face-to-face meetings happen, then that is recorded. So is that
Yes.
something that's already okay?
Yes.
All right.
So I'm thinking, and Fred, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong about the cadence of the different reviews that we do. So we have quantitative data, right, that we collect on a whole bunch of policy required activities on a case. Then there's also our qualitative reviews. We have several different versions that we do. One of them is in-home report that I think that's what we call it. But there's certain things for in-home cases that are tracked, and one of the elements of that is that's just one example, but the face-to-face contacts and visitation being done consistent with policy, and those reviews are pulled, where cases are actually pulled and reviewed and matched up against policy requirements, and that's just happens to be one of the things. Fred, did I describe that right, correct enough for I know it's in that one.
I would just add that the difference between what we can pull from the data system when it comes to visitation is frequency, right? So we do record every time we see people. We also record phone calls and emails and all kinds of other contacts as well. But the policy requirements most focused, and the practice guides most focused on face-to-face contacts. So we can see the frequency of that happening just by looking at the data. The reviews that Commissioner Hamilton's talking about goes further than just looking at frequency, and looks at the quality of those contacts as well, based on the documentation, the narrative documentation that goes along with each of those contacts. And our Child and Family Service Review style reviews do the same kind of thing, but even more deeply, because we actually interview family members and workers and supervisors and talk about what goes on during those contacts there as well, to even get beyond what got written in the documentation, because there's always more, which is a good thing. Yeah.
So,
How
yeah,
often are cases pulled for review?
So the CFSR, well, both CFSR and the other review processes pull cases every month. We're constantly reviewing cases through both of those, all of those processes. Um, different different numbers of cases are pulled. The CFSR, because it's such a deep, time-intensive review, we look at 14 cases across 14 cases per month. The differential response system review or the in-home review, I don't know exactly what the number is per month, but it's probably 4 or 5 times that per month because that's strictly documentation only reviews.
yeah. And then to your point, Welander, like ACRs, we have to do those on every child in care every 6 months. So there's a lot of different ways we collect it. But I think for purposes of looking at automated data, certainly the places where we can pull the data from around contacts is there. The other thing you asked, which is also certainly something that we do track in an automated way, is cases, calls to the care line, the overall calls to the care line. Of the calls to the care line, how many are accepted, meeting the definitions of neglect and abuse, or accepted for investigation? And then what track do they go? Investigation or the differential response or FAR? I think you had that question. So we have those breakouts as well that would be responsive to, I think, what you were just also asking about.
Yeah, yes, okay, all right. Just thinking through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's when we're thinking is I know people, the goal is not to micromanage, but to make sure that what is happening that what is supposed to be happening is actually happening. And ensuring that in-person meetings are happening on schedule, that there are the follow-ups, that the communication between families and social workers, caseworker is happening when it's supposed to be happening at a minimum, is, I think, very important to include. So okay. Representative Foster, did you have a comment? I'm sorry, I saw your hand up again, or it might just still be up from before. Oh, okay, all set. Let's see. So cases open, cases closed. This is all something that is currently tracked, I would assume. And I didn't know if anyone who is on the meeting now wanted to touch base about the reports on death, injury, and abuse, the critical incident transparency process. If they had shared that. Again, we can always jump back to anything. This is not the only time that we will be discussing these. Fred?
One thing I just wanted to point out about a couple of the items that were included on the list, just that I think would be helpful for organization's purpose. They're not really actual data points or metrics that that we want to include, but they're guidelines or principles that we want to follow across the dashboard. So under transparency, the trends over time, and having clear definitions for measures. We may want to just pull those kinds of things off of this list into a separate list. Principles to keep in mind as we're building this, right?
That's, yeah, we can.
I'm sorry, I may be jumping ahead.
No. This is, nope, not at all.
Okay.
No, it's hard when we are taking quickly shared in, points and trying to have deep dive conversations. But let's see. The frontline staffing distinguished from supervisory and management. So I'm assuming that we are just trying to make sure that if we can look at a historical trend of the number of caseworkers versus supervisors, and has that changed? And if things have changed either way, has that led to more review, which has led to better outcomes, things like that? I would imagine that could be included in some of the employment data points that we had talked about before, which seems very similar to supervisor to workforce ratios. I believe there are set ratios already in place for not just caseloads, but how many caseworkers are under each reach. Okay.
Yep.
That might be helpful to have listed as a definition or as something under some of the static information. So frequently asked questions, how many how many cases should each, caseworker have? How many, what is the pathway for supervision?
Yeah, and maybe to that point, I didn't mean to interrupt, is that we could, like, to the extent we're going to think about a packaging of some sort of workforce category, that's an area where I think we could hyperlink to existing policies that say, because like the ratios, and even though that's all on our website, to link it to supervisory, for example, our supervision policy or something like that, where we don't want to make it so cumbersome that it's hard to actually navigate and the visual is not user friendly. But by the same token, I think that's where we could add that detail. So just sort of, it's almost just like FY. It's like a definitional, I guess, in some ways, but providing what's the expected, what's the expected ratios by.
Yeah, right. What is expected, and are we meeting it?
Right.
So that combination of factual data point versus the
Yeah.
goals and expectations. So making sure staff training completion, making sure that everyone is meeting the expected training. Again, this would be something that would be broken down hopefully by either geographic region, office region. And that way, if their training is not being completed, we can try to figure out why, or what needs to be done to provide more options for that. Okay, I think this is behavioral health provider capacity and community provider capacity. I'm guessing that, or assuming, excuse me, that this would be another one of those pillars of supports that is potentially not directly related to providing care within the system, but also what may lead to it. So if families aren't able to provide or find the supports that they need in their area for mental, behavioral, or physical health, does it lead to the need for state intervention? Is that something that is tracked at all?
Well, I think
On your
that,
end?
and this is where I'm thinking as I'm going through the list, that there's other sources of data that is, and this, I don't know, screen. Oh, I see Fred's got his hand up. I'm looking for Fred. Around some of the pie data, other data that's collected from providers that might get to some of this, where it wouldn't necessarily be a recreation of it for purpose of the dashboard. But I think what we would, if that information is not right now in a place where it is readily accessible, that we would be able to link to that or somehow include it. Fred, does that make sense to you? Or is that the best source of the data? Like,
so it depends on how deep we go, right? So what we can do in Pi today is to say, over time, here's the number of people that were being served in a given program, even by a given provider, time period after time period. So we can see the numbers of people that are served. We can see the number of people that are referred as well. It's kind of starting at the beginning. And we know what the contracted capacities are supposed to be. So we can kind of compare those two and say, okay, so here's the percentage of that total contracted capacity that was being used at this time and the next time and so on. But what our program leads struggle with is the fact that our provider community is suffering from a lot of the same problems that we suffer from when it comes to staff retention and recruitment. And when you see what that, this provider A has a 99% utilization, while poor provider B only has like a 39% utilization. If you don't also contextualize that with, well, sure, but provider B was down 10 staff out of 15, that's all they could do. Then it's very difficult to tell a true story. You can tell pieces of that story, but it's not really the full story. In order to get to that level of detail, we'd have to have our providers reporting in all of their staff positions, their vacancies, and their time off, frankly, whether it's vacations or even more likely it's like workers' comp kind of time off or long-term time off for injury, disability, whatever, because that really impacts their staffing just like it does ours. And then that's a lot more of an ask of our providers to provide that information to us, because that we'd have to get that very frequently in order for it to be useful. And it would need to be very accurate, which will be difficult. So that's not something that we've asked our providers to give to us in a data feed or enter into Pi to date, just because it's a big ask.
I would imagine there would be another source that perhaps we could integrate that information from, though. I mean, we have just the same way that we have information about Alice numbers, and I know that there's information that has been gathered by potentially like the Department of Public Health about where there are deserts for access to grocery stores and to access to in-community health, providers, excuse me, so that we can get that sort of full picture, but not rely on getting, DCF to provide that information from their community providers. Commissioner?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'm mindful of what we're all collectively trying to accomplish in a short window of time, and I would support the idea of what you're saying, which is I think we should landscape the other areas where there is systemic data around some of because this is really getting to, which is an important certainly topic, but looking at service array. Service array in a broad sense. And so maybe what we can do is I'm thinking through going through some of these lists of things. Where is there information? It might not be exactly what we're looking for, but where is there information already? Because we do look at our Pi data. We do look at data that gets pulled from our various program leads, but it is to compile it for purposes of then trying to populate a database or a data dashboard. It might not be the best way to get at what you were trying to do, which is really, I think, as I'm understanding it, looking at what do we have across the board for service by service category, right? Where are they populated? What's the utilization, right? Like utilization, wait list data, things like that. I would suggest maybe we can do it between now and the next meeting is just other reporting, other things that already exist that capture some of this, because I do think given that this might have to be like phase one is going to be targeting, if we're shooting for a January 1 date to have some of this infrastructure created from an IT standpoint, I think we're going to have to at least initially rely on existing data sets and reports that we have. So we can definitely do that with this list, is to check as well. And I think that's what you were also suggesting, is what else is already out there collected. It might not even just be DCF data. It might be other systemic data around services that are provided to adults through the behavioral health adult system, DMIS and others. So we can take that step to sort of see where else we could link to for some of this provider data.
Yes, I would agree that some of this can definitely be linked to others, and could potentially be included in something like a phase 2 or what have you. So I know this is, and I know I'm looking at the time, and there's a lot more that has to still be discussed in terms of what was shared. So are there any points that anyone in the group, even out of order, would like to just bring up as a priority right now? And I know a lot of people are traveling and unable to sort of unmute and actually engage right now, but are listening attentively. So this is obviously something that we will take any feedback that comes in after the meeting. So looking ahead, just at the last one, just to round out the workforce header, the foster home and availability and foster parent retention. Are there any other data points that you collect currently that relate to foster parents and foster parent availability that go beyond just are they available and basically like, are they available and how long have they stayed in as foster parents? Whether it's they only are able to take one child, they're only able to take older children, just younger children. Is that something that is currently tracked?
Yes, we were able to drill down a little bit more as far as just sort of and this would have to check on the automated data, whether or not but we do collect that by age category. how many are many of the foster parents who are core foster home, like non-relative, non-fictive kin or kinship caregivers, don't have a limit. Their licenses, so we do have a by category as well, but like license category, taking medically complex and that. So we can see that. I do like the focus on, because we are tracking their recruitment and retention and wanting to obviously, and if we can use that dashboard as a way to highlight not only where are we with our recruitment and retention as a system, but click here, like a scan code. I don't know, I'm being overly, but like for people who want to be foster parents, if like we know there's a need, maybe we can also use this as a link to, if you are interested in helping and becoming a foster parent, here's a link to how to access that. And we do track separately, which I think is also, I think we would probably intend to highlight this as well anyway, is the number of children in care who are placed with relatives or people that they know, because that is one of our goals, is to increase. We are doing better than most states nationally on that number of the number of kids in care. About 50% are with relatives or people they know. But we think we can do better there. So that's another area of focus for us. And so if we're partially using this data to inform about who we need and where to kind of focus our energies on our recruitment efforts, that might help us. So I'll check with our foster care director as well, because they are actively looking at a host of new enhanced, I guess I'll call it, really strategies on how we're going to get the word out about attracting folks to help. And so we want to see those numbers increase.
That would be very helpful. And yeah, okay. Let's see. What I am going to ask the rest of the group to do is just look at not only the list of that we've discussed today, but the rest of the agenda points of what had been included in the survey as things that we would like to A, discuss, and B, potentially see as data points. And if you are able to really pick out again, I know we asked for your priorities, but if we can really drill down onto what you think are the critical points that need to be included, and if there's anything that was not included on this list or that you would like to see a little bit more detail on, like, if a child enters like a permanent placement, do we track in a year or two if they come back into the system? Does that, if there's something that is a more specific point that we think would be helpful to improve the outcomes in general, I think that would be helpful to know now ahead of time. So if that type of feedback can be provided to myself and Senator Marr, I think that would be really helpful. Let's see. Because we are working on such a tight timeline, I believe our next meeting, Mia, can you confirm, is it September 1st or I believe it's September 1st?
Give me one quick moment. It looks
Okay.
like, yep, September 1st. And then
Okay.
we're going to have meetings for each of the 5 Tuesdays in September.
Okay, great, thank you. If that can be done before the next meeting, that would be very helpful. And again, I'm happy to talk with anyone between now and then. Also just wanted to know, I did have, we tried to get some information about whether or not we needed to have, based off of the legislation, the report finalized by October 1st. And just at the end of the agenda, there is that note that we are just going to be submitting a progress report and an update by that original deadline, and then shortly afterwards. So it gives us a little bit more wiggle time to pull all of this together and try to identify what can actually be done, what is actually really helpful, and a little bit more flexibility in finalizing that list before it gets sent to the tech team at DCF. I think that we can probably find a good closing point here. I didn't know if Commissioner, would you like to say anything to wrap up?
No, just thank you. I think this has been a really helpful conversation, and I know there's a lot of information we all want to be able to unpack and consider for inclusion here. So I just, again, we're looking forward to the continued conversation and partnership on that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Thank you everyone for your time today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.